San Francisco peaks. So just to kind of visually get us into the frame of thinking about the watershed as a whole. Next slide. So what is the WARF, the Watershed Alliance for the Rio de Flag? And what is it about this watershed plan for the Rio de Flag? What is the effort? So the Friends of the Rio de Flag first envisioned a Rio de Flag watershed plan and applied successfully to a grant program from the Bureau of Reclamation called Water Smart Grant Program. And there are two specific goals here as deliverables to that grant, which is to create a diverse and expanded watershed stakeholder group. And that's the Watershed Alliance for the Rio de Flag. So starting with the Friends of the Rio de Flag and really expanding that and diversifying it and growing it into a larger watershed group. And then also to develop this active living community-based watershed plan where we can then collaborate as the Watershed Alliance for the Rio de Flag to undertake these priority projects that we're all identifying together, evaluate the success of those and make adaptations in the plan going forward as we see how effective those are. So next slide, please. And here, this one is really addressing how you can be involved and why it is important that everyone be involved. Of course, the involvement begins with these 6 Explore the Watershed Zoom meetings, which is what folks have been attending and are now up on this website, watershedalliancefortherio.net, where we've been posting the Zoom recordings and the results and notes from these various series. And this is the 5th one of 6. And more importantly, watershed scale work is quite complex, and it's socially and ecologically comprehensive in the way that we're attempting to do this, and forward-looking. So we're hoping to plan for the future in a way that allows us to work together to overcome difficult, complex issues, and also to envision what we want this watershed to look like in the future. So we really need our unique and amazing community involved. So there are more ways to get involved on the website, and there'll be more steps along the way beyond these Zoom meetings where we will engage the public in finishing up this plan. So what will it do for our watershed? So we seek to bring together conservation, awareness building, and restoration activities throughout the Rio de Flag watershed. So this is a coordinated, collaborative, and inclusive community effort. And it's guided by science and multicultural perspectives. So that's really the goal of what we're trying to do with this planning effort. So thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. And to give you guys a bit of an agenda for tonight's session, let me first introduce myself. My name is Carrie Eberly. I work for Southwest Decision Resources. We have been hired by through the Water Smart Grant and through Friends of the Rio de Flag to help facilitate these sessions and to help. We helped on the first end, on the front end of kind of getting the WARF, the Watershed Alliance for the Rio, up and running and moving forward. And now we're helping facilitate these sessions. So thank you guys all for joining us tonight. We have another great session. This is the 5th in our series of 6. And tonight is Rio for the People. So I'm gonna give you guys a brief Zoom orientation, which I really feel like, we're about a year in to everybody really just only using Zoom. So I think most people are pretty well versed, but I'm gonna give you guys a quick orientation there. I'm going to give a brief introduction to our panelists, and then we'll get started with their presentation. We hope to adjourn at 7 o'clock, but we always like to keep the Zoom open until 7:15 if people want to chat. These are super interesting topics, and we understand that people like to have a little extra time to talk about those. So to give you guys an idea, obviously, the Zoom world where we know how to turn on and off our mute. This is what I do for my job, and I still forget to turn my microphone on and off. So if we could all try in the large setting when we're listening to presentations to turn our mute buttons off. So we're turning our microphones off. And then when we get to the community dialogue, we would really like you guys to turn them back on. Likewise, if you guys have video, I understand it's right over the dinner hour. If you guys are eating, obviously feel free to turn your videos off, but we love to see all of the participants' faces as well. We will be using the chat function quite a bit tonight. So as we move through this PowerPoint presentation by our three presenters, if you guys have questions, please put them in the chat box. That's the best way that we can we can direct them back to answering those questions for you. We can take some of those questions and put them in the community dialogue space. So please feel free to use that chat box. Participants, the Zoom has updated, so you guys can go down on the lower part of the screen and hit reactions. There's a little reactions button and you can raise your hand. So if you have questions, you can feel free to do that. If you want to see more friendly faces, feel free to choose the gallery grid view. That helps a lot to kind of see who's talking and see who else is out there. And as always, we ask you guys to use general meeting etiquette, respectful behavior, and to please try to stay engaged. With me tonight is Lisa Clark. She is helping me with moderating the chat box and all that comes with the facilitation it's not really behind the scenes. Usually this would be behind the scenes, but this is in front of the screen. So I'm gonna stop share for just 1 second. And we like to get the kickoff to every meeting. We like to see what is your interest in the watershed. And we recognize that everyone has lots of interests when it comes to the Rio de Flag watershed, but we're asking you to pick the one that best represents what your interest is. So if you look in the chat box, I have put a link in there. And if you click on that link, it will take you to a little poll and you can pick what is the one interest that best represents your personal interest in the Rio de Flag watershed. And then I will present those results back to you in a second. So take 30 seconds and take that little poll.
Carrie, it says Menti says there's no active question.
Ah!
An error for me too.
All right. That is a bummer. Sorry, guys.
Well,
mine just
the
came
question
up
is just
if you
not
refresh.
If you refresh.
Yeah, mine just came up.
Oh, is it working?
Okay,
Sorry, guys.
there we go.
Okay.
Yep, there it is. Yay.
All right, it looks like it's working now. I'm seeing answers come in. Thank you for having a little bit of patience with us. Nope, not that one, Carrie. Oh, my screen sharing tonight. My apologies. All right, so this is what this is supposed to look like. Could you guys see that? I'm so sorry. No, can't see it. Can you see it now? Yes, fantastic. I was just giving you guys lots of time to fill out that survey. It's really all part of the plan there. So these are great. They give us a lot of insight into the people who are participating in our community meetings. So thank you guys for answering this. It looks like tonight we have the largest interest, equal parts community awareness and education and natural science, followed up closely by environmental justice. So good interest, especially for the topic tonight. And it looks like almost everybody's answered. So again, thank you guys for bearing with me on that on that Menti there. I will get us back to our presentation. And we are going to kick it off, letting you guys know that we have 3 presenters tonight. Matt Munchna, who is not in Arizona anymore, unfortunately, but living his best life in Oregon, and was the former NAU Sustainability Manager. We have Deb Harris from the Southside Community Association. She is the Executive Director. And Martin Ince, who is the Multimodal Transportation Manager from the City of Flagstaff. We're going to start off with Matt. So I'm going to let you take it away, Matt. Just let me know when I should advance your slides, okay?
Okay, that sounds great. Well, thanks for asking me to speak. I'm Matt Munchna. I'm from Prescott, Arizona. It's where my parents still live, and spent the last 8 years in Flagstaff. 4 of those directly in the south side on South O'Leary Street. As Deb can attest, I popped into the Murdoch Center a lot to see if there's any extra cookies or snacks lying around, and got to know Deb and learned a lot about the South Side through that. And a part of my curiosity was really stirred in my graduate program in sociology at NAU when I had a mentor there, Dr. Guthrie, who pointed me towards the Rio Project as a potential interesting project to look at the nexus of environmental planning and social vulnerabilities and how those things intertwine. And so I looked at the social ramifications of the Rio de Flag project and some of the impacts stated and unstated in that project. And then the Friends of the Rio de Flag were awarded an environmental justice grant from the EPA, and I was brought in with that project to host some workshops, which SDR and the city and Southside Community Association were all a part of. And really heard a lot of great stories. We've kind of been puzzle piecing the history of the Rio and Southside together the last few years, and it's been really rich. Some of the pieces are more complex than others, and but yeah, the stories from the neighborhood were really fascinating. And then I also was able to facilitate the stakeholder meetings for the Southside Neighborhood Plan over the last year and a half, and was the sustainability manager the last 2 years. These photos, the top right is me and my partner Caitlin in our quarantine wedding in late March. It was really fun, party to follow in the years to come. And that middle photo is a photo of us last week. We're out in the snow in Central Oregon. There's a lot more water here. You'd never believe how much water there are in other places, but Oregon's got a lot of water and snow this year. And then last photo is our furry child, Cusco, who yeah, is a good little buddy. Okay, next slide. So through some of my research, and I have to thank my brother-in-law who's on the call right now, because he helped me put this graphic together years ago for my thesis. But through my research, I really looked at the floodplain and how that impacts the Southside neighborhood. So just to give a frame of reference, where the Southside is, what are we talking about? It's the neighborhood between downtown and Northern Arizona University. You have Milton as a border on the east, the tracks to the north, NAU and Franklin to the south there, and then to the east would be Butler as well. And you see how the 100-year and 500-year floodplains really make up of most, if not all, of the Southside neighborhood. And that hashed line going through there is the Rio Channel. Okay, next slide. So the history of the Southside, and I'm going to let Deb talk a lot more on this, but through my research and through conversations with Deb and other longer community members, this rich history of diversity emerged. The hands that really built Flagstaff and Flagstaff's economy lived in Southside and called Southside home. It was the African-American lumberyard workers, the Hispanic railroad workers, the Asian business owners, the Native American lumberjacks, and these people were all vital in building Flagstaff's economy, and they were all a part of Southside's makeup and community. And next slide. And this history, like much of the US, is really riddled with inequalities and discrimination and racism. And the Flagstaff was no different. We had a segregated neighborhood, a segregated school, the Dunbar School, which Wilson Riles, who's the middle figure represented on that mural, which lives on the Murdoch Center, Wilson played a large role in helping desegregate Flagstaff schools in 1952, which was 2 years ahead of the federal mandate in the Brown versus the Board of Education. And along with Sturgeon Cromer, Wilson Riles really helped say, no, Flagstaff is different. We need to be bigger and better than this and push that. But as we know, in America's history, as well as in Flagstaff, segregation didn't just go away. In fact, in many large cities, it is now worse than it was during the Jim Crow era in the early 1900s. So segregation is a part of the history, and I think plays a piece in understanding, okay, how does the social and the environmental play together? How does this play into the watershed planning? Next slide, please. One of the key pieces that I dug up in my research was that the Rio was moved. And you'll see in this map of downtown, you'll see the hashed line is the historic channel, the original channel. It's a larger channel, but if you look just north of the tracks there, that top arrow is sort of pointing to that split. It used to cut right down through the center of downtown Flagstaff. And what the city fathers decided was to prevent flooding north of the tracks and the downtown area. Let's divert it through a man-made channel through the South Side neighborhood and out and around. And there was a shallow trench that was dug, and there's different theories on when and why. Some people say, well, there was flooding at the sawmill. That's why they dug the channel through the South Side, or to protect the Brennan homes, upper middle class subdivision that was going in at that time. They wanted to reroute some of the water and push it through the South Side. But this really amplified flooding and the effects of the floodplain, which we experienced in 1983 when FEMA declared much of the South Side and downtown Flagstaff in a floodplain to have some effect there. Okay, next slide. Flagstaff is no stranger to flooding. Flooding in the desert often seems like an oxymoron, but Flagstaff in our monsoon rains, we've experienced a lot of floods throughout our history. One account that I remember coming across in my research was the 1903 flood, when there was up to 3 feet of water in front of the Weatherford Hotel, and the wooden boardwalks out front of the hotel were floating down the street. This is a photo from 1993 in the South Side, one of the largest floods in terms of total volume. Continental Estates, or Lake Continental, was birthed after that flood. Next slide. And in the more recent years, we've seen it not every year, but more frequently. The last 100 years, we've seen large-scale flooding every 1 to 13 years, and now it's more like 1 in every 7 years. And we know just with the changing climate and more rainfall and less snowpack as the planet warms, that rainfall is going to continue and flooding is going to continue to be a threat. And Flagstaff has seen this picture. If you've lived in Flagstaff, not even in the neighborhood, you've seen these news photos and experienced these flooded streets. Next slide. So what I really dug into in my research was saying, okay, what are the social ramifications of this? And what I came across was sort of 3 threats to homeowners, and not only homeowners, but homeowners in the floodplain and homeowners in the South Side. One is physical flooding and the damage to someone's home. Second is mandatory flood insurance premiums, which have been going up and up. I talked to one resident in 2017 who said their insurance 10 years ago, so 2007, was $300 a year, and now it's $3,000. And I've heard that and read about that across the nation and increasing flood insurance premiums. And then also there's the 50% rule in place that if any renovation application goes through that is more than 50% of the value of the home, it must be renovated to meet the floodplain regulations, which are in place for any new construction. And you'll see that in the South Side, that a lot of new structures that are being built have quite a large foundation. In some parts, not as much, maybe a foot, but in other areas up to 6 feet of added foundation to lift the housing structure out of the floodplain. So it makes development expensive. It makes renovations difficult, especially for a lot of these older homes that might need a more large scale project. And next slide, thanks. Last piece, just tying it into the importance for the watershed. I think along the lines of just recognizing how equity plays a role in environmental planning, I think that's the one piece that I wanted to lay to this group and a lot of the friends and repeat offenders I see on this call from Friends of the Rio and going through this watershed planning. Who are really planning for, and how and will they access these natural spaces? But it's also a really crucial central hub, which I know Martin will talk about, for transportation between downtown and NAU and Route 66, and then the NAPTA bus hub, which is located in the South Side. Also for recreation, access to recreation trails out the Sinclair Wash or down towards Fort Tuthill, walkability and access to natural spaces, as well as a geographical basin that is formed in the South Side. And if you're ever up on Observatory Mesa, you can look down and see Flagstaff forms this natural sort of basin, and South Side sits right there, and it's sort of a natural bottom of the bowl there. And again, yeah, environmental planning has long overlooked people on the margins, people in the shadows, and it is vital to recognize, okay, who are really planning for, who will really use this, and what do they want instead of planning for them. And I'm really grateful that these sorts of conversations are happening for this effort, because I think this is step one to really dig into that and know some of the history. But I want to pass it to Deb. Basically, what I said is everything that Deb and or Dr. Guthrie has taught to me. So she has more experience here, and yeah, just grateful to be here and share this conversation. So thanks.
Thank you, Matt. And we're just gonna kick it right over to Deb. And please, if you guys have questions for Matt or Deb as we're going along, Martin as well, please feel free to put those in the chat. There's some really interesting nuggets here that I think will be really important as this effort continues to move forward.
Okay. Thank you so much. And it's so good to see you, Matt. I wish we could see each other in person. But I'm going to, I think that it's only fitting that I start this presentation out with a land acknowledgement. And we use this, we meaning the Southside Community Association and the Black Coalition of Flagstaff have started to use this. And I just want to get to it because I think it's important for people to hear that. So let me just see if I can, gonna exit the screen. And then, okay, so can you still hear me?
Yes, we can, Deb.
Okay, all right, I just wanted to make sure I didn't lose you. Okay, so here's the acknowledgement. We recognize that this place we call home sits at the base of the San Francisco Peaks on homeland shepherded by more than 12 tribal nations and indigenous peoples throughout this region. We honor them, their legacies, their traditions, and their past, current, and future generations who will forever call this place home. Furthermore, we recognize that this dream we carry of beloved community rests on the shoulders of Black women and men who populated the historic Southside community of Flagstaff, who worked the lumber yard and various industries through which Flagstaff historically thrived and who continue to toil for recognition, memory, and unity. And finally, we recognize and acknowledge that the very foundation of the United States of America was built on the free and forced labor of Black people of the African diaspora and Black people indigenous of this land. This foundation has generational and exponential effects that continue to negatively impact Black communities today and remain uncompensated. The historical and contemporary contributions of the Black diaspora continue to shape American culture and benefit all inhabitants of this land. So let me get back. All right, so let me get my strengths so I can have a better view of, okay, there it is. All right, so let me just tell you a little bit about myself. I've been in Flagstaff now since 1993, so about 28 years, so a little bit closer to 30 now it's coming up on. And I came here from Wisconsin, in fact, Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and I lived in a place where I watched the Chippewa River run through my campus. And every morning when I went to work, I saw that water running. And if you know anything about Wisconsin, we have lots of water. We have lots of lakes and rivers and those kinds of things. And so I was used to seeing water all the time, but it wasn't water that was damaging to me or to the community that I lived in. I came out here to take a job at Northern Arizona University. And when I retired about 3 years ago, I retired as the Associate Dean of Students at NAU. I worked in higher ed for over 35 years. And so I've got, not counting graduate programs, but I've got over 35 years of higher ed experience in administration. And I currently serve as director for the Southside Community Association. I have an extensive history and experience working with communities of color and the challenges that they face. You can go to the next slide. As Matt said, the historic Murdoch Center sits on the site of the Dunbar School, which was segregated in about 1952, 53, almost 2 years before the infamous Brown versus Board of Education. And we'd like to remind people of that because Flagstaff has a history of being progressive and in fact of thinking about people of color, because for whatever reason, Wilson Rouse and Sturgeon Cromer felt that it was in the best interest of all kids, including kids of color, to desegregate our schools. The Murdoch Center is home to the Southside Community Association. Our goal is to preserve the history and the culture of the Southside neighborhood. We provide an opportunity or a place for people to come and discuss community issues and concerns, because we think that the more we can come together as community members and as neighbors to talk about the small things, then when it's time to have the big conversation, the heavy conversations, the hard conversations, that maybe we'll be a little bit more trusting of one another and we'll care a little bit about that person that's sitting across the table from you because you have danced with them, you have sung with them, you have planted gardens with them. So it's a place to bring community together. It's the gathering place for community celebrations. People celebrate their anniversaries there, their baby showers, their graduation parties, their children's birthdays. I can't tell you the number of events and activities that I have attended at the Murdoch Community Center, just staffing the building. And all of those activities are about community. Next slide. When it was time for us to look at the Southside Community Plan, and when the city came to the Southside and started talking to us about that plan, we were a little hesitant because there's been a lot of history and a lot of distrust with the city. But we thought that that plan would be a roadmap for future development in the neighborhood, because we started seeing that developers were coming in and they were buying up houses and tearing them down and building structures that really didn't belong in the South Side, in that neighborhood. So for over 2 years, we brought community together. We talked about what the neighborhood should look like, what we wanted, what was possible, how we should go about doing the work that needed to be done. And Matt was a big part of that, because toward the end of that project, there were a group of stakeholders, and we were tasked with making some final decisions about priorities and strategies. And so Matt was very helpful in helping us to work through that. And it took a lot of give and take. But I was so proud of the community members that came together to do that. And they committed themselves to 16 meetings. And I can tell you that throughout those 16 meetings, people might have missed one, maybe two, but they were always anxious to find out what happened and then how could they find ways to do input. And so it was just a really good way to bring our community together, the neighborhood, and people who had a stake in that. And so we wanted to also find ways in this plan how we could include the history and the culture of the neighborhood for future developers. Next slide. The lessons that we learned during all of that work that we did really helped us to kind of look at the plan and what it was and what it wasn't. The need for the community to be involved in the decisions that affected them was critical, because in the past, the Southside neighborhood, things happened to them and not with them. And so they had a lot of distrust of that. We had a street in the Southside, Fontaine Street, that was so narrow because at some point in time, it probably was an alley. But that street was so narrow that the neighbors were concerned, and the residents were concerned that if they ever really needed to have the big fire truck come, they could not get down that street because the parking was on both sides and the street was so narrow. So it became an issue of life and safety. And so we worked with the city and with the neighbors to fix that. So it was important for us for the city and for us, because it's us, to show the community and the neighborhood that we were thinking about them. When things didn't work out the way we thought they should, we had to stop and regroup and then change direction. And what I mean by that was that we had the first meeting that we had a lot of people that came to that meeting that really weren't in the South Side. They didn't live in the South Side, but they just came. And so their voices were being heard. And we said, nope, stop, time out. We can't do this. We cannot let other people who do not live in this community and this neighborhood speak for the community. So how are we going to address this? And so what we did was we set up outside tents. We set up tables on street corners. We went knocking on people's doors. We went to churches and talked to people about what we were trying to do and really encouraging people to come out. And so that's two of the lessons that we learned from, and we were able to address right in the middle of working the plan. Gentrification was definitely something that came up because we realized that as we continued to work on this plan and as this plan developed, that gentrification was on the minds of a lot of people. They were concerned that if people keep building like they're building and all of this other kind of stuff that was happening, that their property values were going to go up so high, possibly, that they would no longer be able to live in the home that their grandfather built. There's also issues or concerns with flooding. And with flood insurance, some people told us that they didn't do flood insurance anymore because it was so cost prohibitive that they had to make a decision between if they were gonna, feed their families or whatever, or do flood insurance, because as Matt said, it was up to 3,000 and 4,000. And so they were just kind of biding their time and hoping and praying that nothing would happen that would destroy their homes. It's important for us to remember to include community in any planning that we do in the city. And the city did win a national and an international award for the plan and for the process that we used in developing the Southside Community Plan. And so we're really pleased with that, because it demonstrated to us and to the city that you could include community in planning and that they could be a vital part of what you were doing, that it brought into the conversation a diversity of ideas. It helped people to be engaged residents. They are proud about what they've accomplished and the work that they've done. And so it's always important to include them in those conversations. And let's see, is there another slide? I can't remember. No, I think that's it. So thank you. And I hope I stayed within my time limit. And I'm sure I'll be sticking around to answer any questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Deb. And you and Matt just did a great job of really giving us a little bit of an insight in your allotted time that you're allowed to have of what the history and the context and the importance of those things, that lessons learned, and especially the historical context there. There are a few questions and comments in the chat box. One I think is directed at you, Matt, if you want to take a minute to address that one. And now I am going to stop sharing, and I'm going to turn over to Martin, because he's going to be sharing on his end. Martin, are you there? There you are.
I think we're here.
Great.
So Carrie, thanks for having me, and thanks to the group for being here for these presentations. My name is Martin Ince. I'm the multimodal transportation planner for the city of Flagstaff, and I've lived in Flagstaff and worked for the city of Flagstaff in various capacities for a little bit more than 23 years. Overall, I've been a city planner for, I hate to admit it, almost 35 years. And I've essentially lived in 3 different places in my life. As I mentioned, Flagstaff for the last 23 or so years. Before that, I lived in Chicago, went to grad school, lived there for a number of years. And then I was born and spent my early years outside of the Twin Cities in Minnesota. So of all those places, just recently, Flagstaff has become the place where I've lived the longest. It also happens to be the place, compared to the other 2, that is by far the driest. We have much less water here, but that doesn't mean anything except that we appreciate the water that we have here all the more.
Martin, quick
Yes.
question for others.
Sure.
I don't think your screen is showing properly. Could you stop sharing and then share again? We could see your slide there we go. Oh, whatever
Okay.
you did. It was showing for a second, and then just want to make sure that we can all see your presentation.
Yeah, you know what happened is I had it on one. I've got 2 screens, so I had it on one screen. I moved it to the other, and that was, remind me not to do that again.
Okay, please don't do that again.
All right, thank you. Is it there now?
It is.
Okay. So I would ask this group if they could name this river that's behind me in this photo, but I think that would be really too easy a question for this group. Yes? Anyone?
Can you bring it a little bit more to the center? For me, it's showing way over.
That'll be the Little Colorado River.
That's the Little Colorado. Thank you, Dr. Barr. Anyway, in my duties for the City of Flagstaff are primarily involved with bicycle and pedestrian issues, but it includes planning for the Flagstaff Urban Trail System. I'm guessing most of you are familiar with the FOOT system. They are a citywide network of shared use pathways. We intend them for use by pedestrians, bicyclists, and other various forms of non-motorized use. They're typically 8 to 10 feet in width. About half of our trails by miles are paved in concrete or asphalt, and about half of them are aggregate surfaced. And currently we have about 58 miles of foots, a little bit more on the foots. They provide a diverse range of experiences. Some trails are located along busy streets, like the one along Route 66, and others go through some of the most beautiful natural areas within the city of Flagstaff. Foots connect the community, so we do our best to extend them to all corners of the city and to all neighborhoods. And they provide access to a variety of important destinations. And then finally, foot trails serve multiple functions. So people use them for recreation and exercise, as well as for meaningful transportation that is getting from point A to point B in a non-motorized fashion. And in fact, I would suggest that foots function best. They work best when they serve multiple functions. So for example, if you're using foots to commute to work or school, and that foots happens to go through a natural area, then so much the better. It's an enhanced experience for your commute. But on the history of foots, the planning for them and actual construction started sometime in the late 80s. There were 3 trail segments recommended as the first phase of the system. They're listed here, one along the Sinclair Wash from campus to the treatment plant, one that's a popular trail today, the Rio de Flag trail over by Fox Glen Park, and then finally along the Rio de Flag, what we now know as the Karen Cooper Trail, essentially from, at the time, Thorpe Park out to Cheshire, and now goes from downtown. And I think it's notable what these 3 initial segments have in common. One commonality is that there was significant portions of the land under them were owned by the city already, so it seemed like it would be fairly easy to put the trail on top. Not much acquisition was required. And then, of course, the other commonality is that they all follow significant watersheds in the city, and even early on, that kind of relationship between the trails and riparian areas was recognized. A bit more on how we here in Flagstaff, what our relationship is to the outdoors. I don't think it comes as a surprise. I don't think anybody would dispute me when I said that access to open space and to nature is a significant Flagstaff value. We all love and appreciate that, and it's one of the big reasons we live here and why people like to be here. At one level, we are surrounded by a national forest, biggest ponderosa pine forest in the world, and if you go a little further out beyond that, there are minor natural features like the Grand Canyon and other things that we enjoy. But I think that our desire to be in the outdoors and to have contact with nature really plays out at a much more local level. We like to have nature and open space in proximity to where we are, to where we work and live and go to school. And in fact, to have it adjacent if possible. So we like to be able to take our lunch hour and go out and watch birds. We like to go home at the end of the day and walk our dogs and immerse ourselves in nature at the same time. So I think we could probably characterize it as a difference between nature with an uppercase N and nature with a lowercase. And the image I've got on this slide is along the Karen Cooper Trail, which happens to overlap significantly with the Rio de Flag through the townsite neighborhood. And this is a fairly narrow corridor. There's really nothing that recommends it as kind of a natural or open space, and yet I think it's one of the most significant natural greenways, open space greenways in Flagstaff, simply because of where it is and what purpose it serves. And there's a couple here kind of in the background of that photo, and I like to imagine that they're on a date and walking from wherever they live or met into downtown to have dinner. So when we're able to kind of meet our expectations and our desires and have open space that's woven throughout the community and sprinkled throughout our neighborhoods, I think it does a tremendous service to the community in terms of helping to be a kind of a defining feature for our neighborhoods. It helps us organize our urban form, and it really enhances the community character of Flagstaff when open space is part of our community and built all around us. This becomes really, really important as Flagstaff continues to develop, and in a lot of ways, I think it helps soften the impacts or mitigate some of the impacts of development, especially as Flagstaff grows more dense in our core. If we're able to keep our access to both the regional open space in terms of the forest around us, as well as that lowercase and access to nature kind of as part of our everyday lives. Watersheds and riparian areas serve a critical function in that, because by their nature, they're linear and they extend all over the city. Although we can look at different, some are better preserved and in a more natural state than others, of course, but they form a system that goes all throughout the community and form the backbone of really a natural system of greenways. And of course, once that's in place, it's natural to think of that as a location for the trail system as well, because the trail system needs linear, continuous corridors, and we want to extend all the way through town. And that relationship is beneficial in both directions. I think the trails, the foots give access to our riparian and watershed areas and help increase appreciation for them and help us manage them. And then as I mentioned before, going through natural areas is a great benefit for our trails and people who are using them for whatever they use them for, including commuting. So I'm going to go through a series of maps to kind of illustrate that connection, that point. So here's the city of Flagstaff, and we can show how it works to have the national forest kind of surrounding us, add in our existing regional open spaces from Observatory Mesa in the upper left-hand corner, Picture Canyon in the upper right, Fort Tuthill the lower left, and Walnut Canyon the lower right, as well as Buffalo Park, McMillan Mason, and Thorpe Park kind of in the middle. If we bring in the Rio de Flag corridor, we start to see that now we have a nice linear corridor that starts to make connections through town, and then bring in the other tributaries of the Rio around town. You can start to see that just on that basis, if this were to be brought to fruition, it makes a nice comprehensive overall system of open space for the city. And of course, the tying with trails becomes obvious when I show you our existing foots trails and planned foots trails. And it gets to be a little bit messy, but you can see that they significantly follow those same corridors where we have watersheds and riparian areas. So that gives us a really good basis for planning not only a foot system, but an open space system throughout the community. But I think we would be remiss if we stopped there and didn't ask a couple of additional questions about how we get access to that system and to those trails. So I'll go through each one of these. The first one is, does the system extend to all neighborhoods? And here I've got a little map of Sunnyside, and you can see that, I think that's the Spruce Avenue wash that goes through Sunnyside, but it is significantly altered, channelized underground in a lot of places, and may not be a great candidate as open space corridor. That really leaves us with very few opportunities for foots trails through that neighborhood. We have addressed it partially by looking to the east slope of McMillan Mesa to the west of Sunnyside. And a number of years ago, the city built a number of foots connections that start in the neighborhood and go up to the top. We essentially built them where people had already created social trails. So we were building formal trails where people had already determined that it was a benefit to get access. Since we really can't put any foots through the middle of Sunnyside, there's not great opportunities for that. I think it becomes more important for us to provide good bicycle and pedestrian access and make sure that sidewalks, bike lanes, bikeways are present. and very comfortable for people, so they at least have that way to get out to McMillan Mesa and into that open space and onto those trails. Not a dissimilar story in the south side. Kind of in here, there's trails in the vicinity, but not really great opportunities for trails to go through south side, possibly with the Rio de Flag and what becomes of that channel. But again, to make that work and to give people access to that open space and to those trails, we have to really work on pedestrian and bike connections on the existing streets in south side. Next question is there good access from these neighborhoods to the foots? And here I use the example of Brannan. And there's an absolutely gorgeous open space and foots trail that goes just to the north of that neighborhood. But direct access between that neighborhood and that trail and that open space is not always great. There's a bit of topography in between. There's private property. We have a few opportunities, but I think to really make this function well for the neighborhood, we have to take advantage of those opportunities and provide some direct connections into the neighborhood. Now, I don't have it shown here, but we do have some planned as part of the Foots Master Plan, where we do have those, where people are using it already, where we have open space or city-owned property to make the connection from where people live down to that trail. And then the last question is, are trails usable by everyone in the community? And I think all of us are familiar with the Americans with Disabilities Act, which specifies standards and guidelines for accessibility. And I would refer to that as the capital A for accessibility, where we meet those standards. Those are good standards to meet, but I think there's also a role for a lowercase accessibility, a lowercase a, where we endeavor to build our trails in a way that they're follow the principles of universal design. So they're open and available and usable by as much of the community as possible, including those with mobility challenges. And I think that's the end of my slide, end of my slides in my presentation. Again, I thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to